When we think about surveillance states, we imagine modern technology cameras on every street, digital tracking, and governments monitoring citizens in real time. We think of data, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. But what if the foundations of surveillance were built over 2,000 years ago? Long before the internet, before electricity, before even paper became widespread, one civilization was already developing a system to monitor its population, control information, and maintain order across vast territories. That civilization was ancient China, and its methods were not just advanced for their time, they were revolutionary. Because this wasn't just about watching people. It was about building a system where the state could know, control, and shape society itself. So, how did ancient rulers, without modern technology, create a system of surveillance powerful enough to control millions? And how did these early methods influence the very idea of governance? To understand that, we must go back to the rise of China's first empire. The foundations of China's surveillance system were laid during the rise of the first unified empire under Qin Shi Huang in the 3rd century BCE. After centuries of warfare during the Warring States period, the Qin state emerged victorious, unifying China under a single centralized authority. But unification created a new problem. How do you control a vast population spread across enormous distances, with diverse cultures, languages, and loyalties? For Qin Shi Huang, the answer was not just military power, it was information. He adopted the philosophy of legalism, which emphasized strict laws, harsh punishments, and total state authority. Legalism viewed humans as inherently self-interested and believed that only constant oversight and enforcement could maintain order. This was the beginning of a system where the state did not merely rule, it monitored. One of the most powerful tools of early surveillance in ancient China was the system of population registration. Under the Qin and later dynasties, households were carefully recorded, categorized, and tracked by the state. Every family belonged to a structured unit, and these units were grouped into larger administrative networks. This system allowed officials to know who lived where, who they were connected to, and what responsibilities they held. But the system went even further. It introduced a concept of collective responsibility where families and neighbors were held accountable for each other's actions. If one person committed a crime, others in their group could also be punished for failing to report it. This created a powerful psychological effect. Surveillance no longer depended solely on officials. It became embedded in society itself. People watched each other. Communities became extensions of the state. To maintain control over such a vast empire, ancient Chinese rulers relied heavily on networks of local officials and informants. These individuals served as the eyes and ears of the state, reporting on everything from tax collection to potential dissent. Officials were expected to monitor behavior, enforce laws, and ensure loyalty to the central authority. At the same time, informants, sometimes ordinary citizens, provided additional layers of intelligence. This created a multi-tiered system of observation. Information flowed upward, from villages to regional authorities, and ultimately to the emperor's court. The result was not perfect control, but it was remarkably effective for its time. The state did not need to see everything. It only needed to know enough. Surveillance in ancient China was not limited to people's actions. It extended to their ideas. Under Qin Shi Huang, the state took drastic measures to control intellectual life, most famously through the event known as the burning of books and burying of scholars. Texts that did not align with official ideology were destroyed, and scholars who resisted were punished. This was not simply censorship. It was an attempt to control the flow of knowledge itself. By limiting access to alternative ideas, the state reduced the possibility of dissent and reinforced its authority. In this sense, surveillance was not just about watching behavior. It was about shaping thought. Another powerful tool of surveillance came in the form of standardization. Under the Qin dynasty, systems of writing, measurement, currency, and even the width of cart axles were standardized across the empire. At first glance, this may seem like simple administrative reform, but it had deeper implications. Standardization made it easier for the state to monitor economic activity. enforce laws, and integrate diverse regions into a single system. It reduced ambiguity, increased efficiency, and strengthened central control. When everything is measured the same way, recorded the same way, and communicated the same way, it becomes much easier to observe and regulate. In this way, even infrastructure became part of the surveillance system. Surveillance is only effective if it is backed by consequences. Ancient China's system relied heavily on strict punishments to enforce compliance. Under legalist principles, penalties were severe and enforcement was often uncompromising. This created an environment where the possibility of being watched, even if not constant, was enough to influence behavior. People did not need to be observed at all times. They only needed to believe that they could be. This psychological dimension was crucial. Surveillance became internalized. Control moved from the external world into the minds of individuals. Although the Qin dynasty was short-lived, many of its systems were adopted and refined by later dynasties, particularly the Han dynasty. The Han rulers softened some of the harsher aspects of legalism, blending it with Confucian ideals. But they retained the administrative structures that allow for population tracking, information gathering, and centralized control. Over time, these systems became more sophisticated. Census taking improved, bureaucracies expanded, communication networks developed. What began as a rigid and often brutal system evolved into a more stable and enduring model of governance. So can we truly call ancient China the world's first surveillance state? In many ways, yes. While it lacked modern technology, it possessed something equally powerful: a system designed to gather information, monitor behavior, and enforce control across a massive population. It combined bureaucracy, social structure, ideology, and psychology into a unified mechanism of governance. It was not perfect. It faced resistance, corruption, and limitations. But its core idea that the state must see, know, and regulate society would echo throughout history. The story of ancient China's surveillance system challenges a common assumption that modern control is purely a product of modern technology. In reality, the principles of surveillance are much older. They were built through systems of registration, networks of informants, control of information, and the shaping of human behavior. Technology may have changed, but the logic remains strikingly familiar. So the next time you think about surveillance in the modern world, ask yourself, are we witnessing something entirely new, or simply the evolution of an idea first perfected over 2,000 years ago?